The smoke rose thin and desperate against the white fury of the blizzard. Most would have missed it entirely, a frail wisp against the vast canvas of mountain sky. But Walking Hawk saw it. The old medicine man paused on the ridge, his eyes narrowing as he tracked the fragile grey column wavering between earth and heaven. Smoke meant fire, fire meant life. And in this killing storm, life was not to be abandoned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The blizzard descended without warning, transforming the Colorado mountain pass into a howling void of white. In the small cabin nestled among the pines, Sarah Mitchell's screams competed with the wind's wail as her body convulsed with another contraction. Her knuckles whitened around the bedpost, sweat freezing on her brow despite the oppressive heat of the fever that gripped her. "Not now," she whispered through clenched teeth. "Please, not now." The baby had chosen the worst possible moment to come. James had left 3 days prior, promising to return with supplies and the midwife from Silverton before the storm hit, but the weather had betrayed them all, sweeping in from the north like God's own fury, burying the narrow mountain trails. Beneath 6 feet of snow, Sarah's legs trembled as she fought to stand, to reach the pile of clean linens she'd prepared weeks ago. The cabin creaked and groaned around her, timber joints protesting under the weight of accumulated snow. The fire in the hearth struggled against drafts that found every crack in the walls her husband had built last summer, full of promises about the silver mine and the fortune waiting to be claimed. Fortune. Sarah almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat as pain ripped through her abdomen again. What fortune waited in these mountains but isolation and hardship? What dreams could survive this wilderness? She'd been a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania, with soft hands and a library of books. Now her hands were calloused, her books abandoned in a trunk, their pages warped from mountain damp. She'd followed James west with her heart full of adventure, and her head full of romantic notions about frontier life. The reality had been a harsh awakening. Outside, the wind screamed higher. Inside, Sarah answered with her own cry as she collapsed onto the bed, her body no longer her own. The hours blurred together after that, a haze of agony, punctuated by moments of terrifying clarity. She tore strips from her petticoat with trembling hands. She boiled water when she could stand. She whispered half-remembered prayers from her childhood. "Please God, please God, please God." The fire dwindled as she labored, her strength to tend it gone. Cold seeped into the cabin like a predator, patient and inevitable. When Sarah finally felt the unstoppable pressure and the burning ring of fire that heralded birth, the windows were frosted thick with ice, and her breath hung visible in the air before her. Come on!" she urged her body, her child. "Come on!" With one final terrible push, her daughter slid into the world, tiny, blue-tinged, and silent. "No," Sarah gasped, gathering the slippery infant to her chest. "No, no, no." She rubbed the baby, frantically, clearing its mouth and nose with shaking fingers, willing it to breathe. The seconds stretched like years until, finally, the infant jerked and let out a thin, reedy wail. Sarah's sob of relief was louder than her daughter's first. "Cry, there you are," she whispered, cradling the newborn close. "There you are, my brave girl." She named her Elizabeth after her own mother, Liz for short, a strong name for a child born in such adversity, a name with history, with roots that might anchor her to this harsh world. The birth had drained what little strength Sarah had left. She managed to sever and tie the cord, to clean herself and the baby as best she could, to wrap Liz in the warmest blanket she had. But after that, exhaustion claimed her. She fell into a fevered sleep with her daughter clutched to her breast, the fire dying in the hearth and the blizzard showing no signs of relenting. She woke to darkness and bitter cold. Liz whimpered weakly against her, her little face pinched with hunger. Sarah's milk had come in while she slept, her breasts painfully engorged. She helped the infant latch, wincing at the initial pain, then sighing as relief followed. "We're going to be fine," she murmured, though her cracked lips and burning forehead suggested otherwise. Just fine. The lie tasted bitter. Sarah knew. The signs of childbed fever. Her sister had died of it back east, leaving behind a grieving husband and 3 small children. The midwife had warned them all about the importance of cleanliness, of proper care. But what choice had Sarah had? What sterile environment could she have created in this primitive cabin with her husband miles away? James, where was he? Had he tried to return and been caught in the storm? Was he lying somewhere beneath the snow, his body already stiffening in death? Or had he reached Silverton safely, now trapped there by impassable trails, unaware that he was already a father? No use in such thoughts. If she was to survive, if Liz was to survive, Sarah needed to focus on the immediate tasks at hand: food, heat, water. The effort it took to rise from the bed left her dizzy and nauseated. She staggered to the hearth. Liz cradled in one arm and used the other to stir the embers and add kindling from the dwindling pile beside the fireplace. The flames caught reluctantly, casting weak light across the cabin's interior. In that light, Sarah took stock of their situation. The food stores were meager: some dried beans, a little flour, jerky tough as leather. She had snowmelt for water at least. The wood would last perhaps 3 days if she was careful. After that, they would freeze. The realization should have terrified her, but Sarah felt oddly calm. The fever was making her thoughts slow and dreamlike. She ate a little jerky, drank some water, and returned to bed with Liz. Outside, the storm continued its assault, snow piling higher against the window panes until the glass admitted only a ghostly blue light. Days passed in this manner, measured by Liz's cries and feedings rather than by the sun's passage. Sarah's fever worsened, then broke, then returned. She moved through the cabin like a ghost, conserving her strength, speaking softly to Liz about the world beyond the storm. "In spring, there are wildflowers that cover the entire meadow," she whispered. "Purple and yellow and blue. And the aspens, their leaves sound like rain when the wind blows. You'll see." Her voice grew hoarser as her throat dried out. Her milk thinned as her own body consumed what little fat remained on her frame. Still, she fed Liz first, ate only enough to maintain her supply, and watched the woodpile diminish. Now, the 7th day, the storm finally broke. The sudden silence woke Sarah from a fitful sleep. No wind howling, no snow pattering against the roof. Just stillness, profound and eerie after the week of constant noise. She rose on unsteady legs and made her way to the window, clearing a patch of frost with her sleeve. The world outside was transformed. Snowdrifts taller than a man buried the woodpile, the outhouse, the small barn. The pines bent under the weight of snow, their branches hanging like mourners' heads. The sky above was a brilliant, cruel blue, beautiful, deadly. Sarah leaned her forehead against the cold glass. James couldn't possibly reach them now, not with the trails buried this deep. Even if the miners organized a rescue party, they wouldn't know to look for her. Her husband might have told them about his pregnant wife, but that didn't mean they'd risk their lives in these conditions for a stranger. No, rescue would not come from Silverton. She would have to save herself, save Liz. That day, Sarah gathered her strength. She ate the last of the jerky, nursed Liz until the infant fell into a milk-drunk sleep, then wrapped herself in every layer she could wear and still move. She fashioned a sling to carry Liz against her chest, tucked beneath her coat where the baby could share her body heat. The door had drifted shut with snow. It took nearly an hour of digging with a cast-iron skillet to clear enough away to force it open. When Sarah finally stepped outside, the cold struck her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and sending daggers of pain through her lungs. The landscape was alien, all familiar landmarks erased under the uniform white. The path to the woodpile existed only in her memory. She waded through snow that reached her thighs, each step a battle against exhaustion and pain. Liz stirred against her chest but didn't cry, as if understanding the need for silence, for conservation. Of energy, Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps by the time she reached the woodpile. Only the top few logs were visible above the snow. She clawed at them with numbing fingers, managed to free 3 pieces before her strength gave out. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough, but it would keep them alive another night. The return journey to the cabin nearly broke her. Twice she fell, struggling back to her feet, only by thinking of Liz's vulnerable warmth against her. When she finally stumbled through the doorway, her clothes crusted with ice and her lips blue, she barely had the presence of mind to bar the door before collapsing beside the hearth. She fed the precious logs into the dying fire with shaking hands. As warmth slowly returned, pain followed, the agony of frozen extremities coming back to life. Sarah bit down on a folded piece of quilt to keep from screaming and waking Liz. That night, she allowed herself to cry for the first time since giving birth. Silent tears tracked down her face as she nursed her daughter in the firelight, watching the flames consume what might be their last hope for warmth. She thought of her parents back in Pennsylvania, who had begged her not to marry James, not to follow him west. She thought of the students she'd abandoned, of the Christmas pageant she'd been planning when James proposed. Most of all, she thought, of her daughter, perfect and innocent and doomed by her mother's poor choices. "I'm sorry," she whispered into Liz's downy hair. "I'm so sorry." Dawn brought new storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Sarah watched them approach with dull acceptance. Perhaps it was better this way, to sleep in the cold, to drift away with Liz in her arms, less suffering than slow starvation. With the last of the wood, she built up the fire one more time. She melted snow for water, soaked the remaining beans to soften them, and chewed a few to release the nutrients into her milk. Then she took Liz to the bed, wrapping them both in every blanket and piece of clothing she could find. "Let me tell you about your grandparents," she began, her voice barely audible. "About the town where I grew up. About the library with the big windows where the sun would shine through on the atlases." She talked until her throat was too dry to continue, filling her daughter's brief life with stories, with history, with all the love she could pour into words. Liz slept, then woke up to nurse, then slept again. The fire died. The cold crept in. Sarah must have drifted off, for she woke suddenly to a sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not the settling of timber. Something else, a rhythmic crunching of snow, footsteps. Her heart leapt, then immediately constricted with fear. James, miners from Silverton, or someone else entirely? The mountains harbored desperate men, deserters, fugitives, those who preferred isolation to civilization. She'd heard stories in town, whispered warnings about cabins found ransacked, settlers discovered in the spring thaw, frozen in postures of final terror. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Sarah clutched Liz tighter, her eyes fixed on the wooden planks, watching for any movement of the latch. Her husband's rifle hung above the mantel, but she lacked the strength to reach it, much less to aim and fire. A knock came, 3 soft taps, as if the visitor knew of the fragile lives within and had no wish to startle them. Sarah remained silent, heart hammering in her chest. Another knock, then a voice, deep, accented, completely unfamiliar. "I see smoke. You need help?" Not James. Not a miner she knew. Sarah swallowed, trying to find her voice. "Who's there?" She finally managed, the words scraping her throat, a pause. "I am called Walking Hawk, medicine man of Ute people. Storm coming again. Not good to be alone. A native." Sarah's mind raced through the stories she'd heard, some of violence, some of unexpected alliance. The settlers and the Ute had an uneasy peace in these mountains, but she'd never had direct contact with any of them before. "My husband will return soon," she lied, her voice stronger now. A longer pause. "No tracks but mine for many miles. Storm. Covered it all. Your man is not coming back soon." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The blunt truth of his words struck Sarah like a physical blow. She looked down at Liz, at her tiny face pinched with cold, even in sleep. What choice did she really have? "The door is barred," she called. I don't have the strength." "To open it." "I open. You move back." Sarah heard scraping, then a grunt of effort. The door shuddered, then gave way with a crack of protesting wood. Cold air rushed in, followed by a figure so bundled in furs that at first he seemed more bear than man. Walking Hawk paused on the threshold, surveying the cabin's interior with dark, keen eyes. His gaze settled on Sarah and the infant, taking, in their condition, with a single sweep. Without a word, he moved to the hearth and began unpacking items from a leather pouch at his waist. Kindling, some kind of tinder Sarah didn't recognize. Within minutes, he had a fire blazing higher than any Sarah had managed in days. The sudden heat made her dizzy with relief. Walking Hawk removed his outer layers of fur, revealing a face weathered by years and elements, lined with experience but not unkindness. "Baby knew," he said, not a question but an observation. Sarah nodded. 7 days. He frowned, reaching into another pouch. "Mother is sick. Need medicine." "Why are you helping us?" Sarah asked, her suspicion not entirely gone, despite her desperate situation. Walking Hawk's hands stilled. He looked at her, his gaze direct and uncompromising. "Many winters I see. Learn this truth. Storm does not ask who you are before it kills. Cold takes white man the same as Ute. Little one there." He nodded toward Liz. "She done nothing to any. Man deserves chance." He resumed his work, crushing dried herbs between his fingers. Saw smoke from the ridge, too small, too desperate, knew someone dying. He shrugged, as if his journey through a killing blizzard to reach an unknown settler's cabin was the most natural thing in the world. Could not leave it. Sarah watched as he added the herbs to a pot of melting snow, his movements precise and practiced. Outside, the wind began to rise again, heralding the storm's return. But inside, for the first time in days, the cold was in retreat. "Thank you," she whispered, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. Walking Hawk didn't respond, focused on his brewing medicine. But in the firelight, Sarah thought she saw the faintest softening around his eyes, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement, an understanding that transcended the vast differences between them. The blizzard descended, once more upon the mountains. But this time, Sarah faced it without fear. This time she was not alone. Dawn broke with a pale, hesitant light filtering through ice-crusted windows. Sarah woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar warmth that enveloped her. The cabin was not freezing. The silence of depleted firewood was replaced by the steady crackle of a well-maintained flame. She struggled to sit up, her body still weak from childbirth and fever. Liz stirred against her, making small, suckling motions in her sleep. Across the cabin, Walking Hawk sat cross-legged beside the hearth, his eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer or meditation. The memory of the previous evening flooded back. The desperate cold, the unexpected knock, the strange medicine that had tasted of pine and bitter roots, but had somehow cooled her fever during the night. Sarah touched her forehead. Still warm, but the burning intensity had subsided. Walking, Hawk opened his eyes, seeming to sense her wakefulness. "Medicine working," he observed. "Need more soon." Sarah nodded, then flinched as Liz began to cry, that distinctive hungry wail that brooked no delay. She adjusted her nightdress, wincing as the baby latched. Walking Hawk turned his attention to the fire, offering her privacy without making an obvious show of it. "The storm?" Sarah asked, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Still angry? 3 days more, maybe 4. He rose with a fluid grace that belied his years and moved to the door. "Need to check traps, bring food." Before Sarah could respond, he had wrapped himself in his furs and slipped outside, letting in a brief, biting gust of wind before securing the door behind him. Sarah stared at the space he had occupied, feeling strangely abandoned, despite having spent a week alone before his arrival. She used his absence to take proper stock of their situation. The woodpile beside the hearth had been replenished. Walking Hawk must have gathered more before she woke. A small pot bubbled at the fire's edge, emanating an unfamiliar but not unpleasant aroma. Her stores of beans and flour remained meager, but they no longer seemed like the last meal of the condemned. Most importantly, Liz seemed stronger this morning. Her cry had been vigorous, her nursing enthusiastic. Sarah stroked her daughter's delicate head, marveling at the dark hair that was already beginning to curl at the temples. "We might just survive this, little one," she murmured. It was strange how quickly the presence of another human being could transform desperate isolation into something approaching normalcy. Sarah had not realized how the weight of being utterly alone had pressed upon her until it was partially lifted by Walking Hawk's arrival. She managed to rise and dress herself in clean clothes for the first time since giving birth, moving slowly but with growing confidence. Each small act of self-care felt like reclaiming something precious that the storm had stolen. Walking Hawk returned an hour later, bearing 2 snowshoe hares. Without ceremony, he set about skinning and preparing them, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched, fascinated despite herself by the economical way he worked, wasting nothing. "I've never had a rabbit before," she admitted. Walking Hawk glanced up briefly. "Good meat. Makes strong milk for the baby." He worked in silence. After that, adding pieces of meat to the pot, along with various roots and dried items from his pouch. The resulting stew filled the cabin with an aroma that made Sarah's mouth water and her stomach clench with sudden, sharp hunger. When he offered her a wooden bowl, she accepted it gratefully, surprised at the rich flavor that greeted her first. Tentative sip, the broth was hearty, the meat tender. She hadn't realized how deadened her senses had become until this moment of vivid taste. "Thank you," she said. The words still inadequate, but all she had to offer. Walking Hawk merely nodded and turned his attention to his own meal. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was a certain understanding in it. 2. People focused on the fundamental task of survival, social niceties, a luxury they could ill afford. After eating, Sarah felt stronger than she had in days. She insisted on cleaning the bowls herself, using melted snow and a precious sliver of soap. Walking Hawk didn't protest, instead turning his attention to mending a tear in his leggings with sinew thread. "How did you learn our language?" Sarah asked, curiosity finally overcoming caution. Walking Hawk didn't look up from his work. "Traders come through Uteland for many years. Army men build fort near summer camp. Some missionaries try to save our souls." A hint of wry humor colored this last statement. "I listen, I learn. You speak very well." He tied off his thread. "Words are tools. Good tools are important for survival." Sarah considered this. "Will you teach me some of your language? I'd like to be able to thank you properly." Now he did look up, surprise briefly visible in his dark eyes. Few white settlers bothered to learn any Ute words, viewing the native tongue as primitive or irrelevant. "Tomorrow," he said finally. "Rest." Now, body still healing, Sarah didn't argue. The brief exertion of washing dishes had indeed drained her renewed energy. She checked on Liz, changed her swaddling clothes, and returned to bed, listening to the howl of the wind outside and the quiet movements of Walking Hawk as he tended the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Questions crowded her mind. How long would Walking Hawk stay? What would happen when James eventually returned? If he returned. What would her husband say about the Ute medicine man who had saved his wife and child? James had never expressed particular animosity toward the native people, but neither had he shown any interest in understanding their ways. He was a man focused on the future, on silver veins and railroad investments, not on the people who had inhabited these mountains for generations before miners arrived with their dynamite and dreams. Sarah's thoughts drifted to her childhood in Pennsylvania, to the tidy house with the white picket fence, to her father's law books and her mother's garden. How far she had traveled from that orderly world. How naive she had been about the realities of frontier life. The storm continued for 3 more days, just as Walking Hawk had predicted. During that time, a fragile routine established itself within the cabin. Walking Hawk went out each morning to check his traps, returning with small game or, once, a handful of pine nuts and dried berries he'd retrieved from a hidden cache. Sarah tended to Liz, gradually regained her strength, and began learning simple Ute phrases. Tuvupugani, she practiced carefully on the 3rd day, the unfamiliar syllables awkward on her tongue. Thank you. Walking Hawk's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes softened. Maiku, he replied. Good. He revealed little about himself, despite Sarah's occasional questions. She learned he was a widower, that his wife had died many winters ago in a sickness that had taken many Ute. He had children and grandchildren who camped with the larger tribal group several valleys away. He had been returning from a solitary spiritual quest when he spotted the smoke from her cabin. Why were you alone in the mountains during winter? Sarah asked once, feeding a stick into the fire. Walking Hawk was silent so long, she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, Old man like me hears ancestors calling, need to listen before journey to spirit world. Sarah frowned. You don't seem old enough to be thinking about dying. A rare, fleeting smile crossed his weathered face. 68 winters, very old for my people. It was more than she had expected. In the flickering firelight, with his straight posture and keen eyes, he seemed ageless rather than elderly. My father died at 59, Sarah offered. Heart. Troubles, Walking Hawk nodded sagely. White men's hearts work too hard. Always hurrying, worrying about tomorrow, next year. Heart gets tired. There was a simple wisdom in his observation that Sarah couldn't deny. Hadn't her father always been preoccupied with his cases, his investments, his reputation in the community? Even on family picnics, his mind had often been elsewhere. James was much the same, constantly scheming, planning, dreaming of the fortune just over the next ridge. Never fully present in the moment, always chasing a future that remained tantalizingly out of reach. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The sudden silence woke Sarah before dawn, that peculiar hush that follows great noise, as if the world itself were holding its breath in the storm's aftermath. Pale golden light bathed the cabin interior as the sun crested the eastern peaks. Walking Hawk was already awake, packing his few belongings into a leather satchel. You're leaving, Sarah said, a statement rather than a question. He nodded. Storm. You're gone. Trail to your town will be passable soon. Husband will come. Sarah sat up, careful not to disturb Liz. And if he doesn't? Walking Hawk paused in his preparations. He will. Men like silver more than they fear snow. The assessment was unnervingly accurate. James would indeed risk dangerous trails for the chance to protect his mining claim. But Walking Hawk's imminent departure still sent a flutter of panic through Sarah's chest. "I don't know how to repay you," she said. Walking Hawk shook his head. "No debt between us. But you saved our lives. We would have died without your help." He regarded her steadily. "Would you have left a Ute woman and baby to freeze?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Of course not." "Then we understand each other." He finished, tying his satchel, and stood. "I leave medicine by fire. Take morning and night until gone. Keep the baby warm." Simple instructions, practical advice, nothing sentimental in his farewell, yet Sarah felt tears threatening. In just a few days, this man had become her only connection to the wider world, a bulwark against the terrible isolation of winter. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Walking Hawk shouldered his pack. "Mountain is small, paths cross." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a denial either. Sarah watched as he wrapped himself in his furs, checked the fire one last time, and moved. To the door. At the threshold he paused and turned back. "Summer comes," he said. "Yellow flowers in the meadow. Good medicine for mother and child. I show you when the snow melts." Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Sarah sat in the sudden emptiness of the cabin, listening to his footsteps crunch away across the crusted snow until even. That faint sound faded. Liz woke hungry, bringing Sarah back to immediate concerns. She fed her daughter, changed her, and then forced herself to follow the routine Walking Hawk had established, banking the fire, melting snow for water, preparing a simple breakfast from their meager stores. The medicine he'd left was a dark, bitter powder that she mixed with water as she'd seen him do. It tasted of earth and roots and something unidentifiable. She drank it dutifully, trusting that it would continue to strengthen her recovering body. The day stretched before her, empty of companionship but full of small tasks. Sarah found herself speaking aloud to Liz, narrating her activities not just to comfort the infant, but to hear a human voice in the silence. "Now we're going to wash these clothes," she explained, dunking a soiled cloth in warm water, "and then we'll hang them by the fire to dry, and later, if we're feeling adventurous, we might even sweep the floor." The one-sided conversation helped, but couldn't completely dispel the renewed sense of isolation. Sarah tried not to watch the door, tried not to hope for Walking Hawk's return or for James's arrival. Hope was a luxury in these mountains, a fragile thing easily crushed by disappointment. Instead, she focused on the tangible, the warm weight of Liz in her arms, the gradually increasing strength in her own limbs, the dwindling but still adequate woodpile, the small store of dried meat Walking Hawk had left behind. 3 days passed this way. Sarah established her own traps using techniques she'd observed, though her attempts were clumsy compared to Walking Hawk's practiced skill. Still, she managed to snare a rabbit, and the pride she felt at this small success was disproportionate to the achievement. She found herself using the Ute words Walking Hawk had taught her, speaking them aloud to Liz as a way of preserving his presence. "Pana," she would say, pointing to the water. "Tuapi," she'd explain, gesturing at the pine trees visible through the window. On the 4th day after Walking Hawk's departure, Sarah ventured outside for the first time since her failed attempt to gather wood before his arrival. The cold still and bit, but the brutal edge of winter had softened slightly. The sun shone brilliantly on the snow-covered landscape, creating a dazzling panorama that momentarily took her breath away. She stood on the small porch, Liz bundled against her chest, and surveyed what she could see of their claim. The snow obscured most landmarks, but she could make out the outline of the shed where James kept his mining tools, the corner of the vegetable garden now buried until spring, the path that led toward the creek and eventually to the main trail. Down to Silverton, that trail remained impassable to wagons, but a determined man on snowshoes could probably make the journey now. Each day that passed without James's return spoke volumes about his priorities. or his fate. Sarah refused to dwell on either possibility. Instead, she focused on what she could control. She used a broom to clear snow from the porch, creating a small patch of relatively dry planking where she could sit for brief periods when the cabin walls seemed to close in around her. It was on this porch that she was sitting, humming softly to Liz, when she heard it. The distant jingle of harness, bells, the creak of wood under strain, the steady rhythm of hooves breaking through crusted snow. Someone was coming up the trail. Sarah stood quickly, heart pounding. James would not announce his arrival with bells. He had taken their only horse, and the animal wore no such ornaments. Miners rarely came this far up the mountain pass, especially in winter. The approaching sounds indicated a larger outfit. A wagon or sleigh with a team. She retreated inside and barred the door, her earlier confidence evaporating. Walking Hawk had showed her how to use the rifle, had made sure it was loaded and ready, but she prayed she wouldn't need it. The sounds grew louder, then stopped altogether. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the approach had been. A knock came, firm, authoritative, nothing like Walking Hawk's gentle tapping. "Hello, the cabin," called a male voice, unfamiliar and brusque. "Anyone alive in there?" Sarah approached the door cautiously. Liz clutched protectively against her. "Who's there?" she called. A pause. "Marshal Davis from Silverton. Got a doctor." "With me. Your husband sent us." James had sent help. Relief warred with suspicion in Sarah's mind. "My husband is James Mitchell." "Yes, ma'am. He's laid up in town with a broken leg. Took a bad fall trying to get back to you during the storm. Been worried sick about you, especially with the baby coming." The details rang true. Sarah unbarred the door with trembling hands and opened it a crack. Two men stood on her porch, one tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a marshal's badge, the other shorter, bespectacled, with a doctor's bag clutched in gloved hands. Behind them, a sturdy sleigh with two horses waited, steam rising from the animal's nostrils. "Mrs. Mitchell?" the marshal asked, tipping his hat. "Your husband said the baby was due any day. Is everyone all right?" Sarah opened the door wider, revealing Liz in her arms. "We're managing." The doctor stepped forward, his kind eyes assessing her from behind fogged spectacles. "The birth went well? No complications?" Sarah hesitated. How could she explain Walking Hawk's intervention? The Ute medicine that had probably saved her life. The doctor would dismiss native remedies as superstition, might even discard the remaining powder Walking Hawk had left. "It was difficult," she said carefully, "but we're both recovering." The doctor nodded, clearly eager to examine them both. "May I come in? This little one should have a proper checkup, and you as well, Mrs. Mitchell." Sarah stood aside to allow the men entry. As they stomped snow from their boots, she caught sight of something tucked beneath the porch step, a small bundle wrapped in hide, nearly invisible against the weathered wood. She recognized Walking Hawk's handiwork immediately. While the men were distracted, removing their heavy coats, Sarah quickly retrieved the package and slipped it into her apron pocket. Inside, she knew she would find more of the healing medicine. Perhaps other herbs and remedies she might need. Walking Hawk had not abandoned them after all. He had been watching, waiting, making sure she and Liz were truly safe before allowing himself to depart. The realization brought a lump to her throat. "Your husband will be mighty relieved to hear you're both alive and well," the marshal was saying, warming his hands by the fire. "He's been beside himself, convinced you'd both perished in the storm." "When can we leave for town?" Sarah asked, allowing the doctor to guide her to a chair for examination. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds," the marshal replied. "Roads barely passable now, but another day's melt should make it easier. Doc here will stay with you tonight just to be safe." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing ahead. Silverton meant safety, supplies, other women to talk with. It meant James, with his broken leg and broken promises. It meant leaving behind the cabin where she had nearly died, where she had given birth alone, where Walking Hawk had appeared like a spirit from the storm to save them. As the doctor examined Liz with gentle hands, Sarah's fingers closed around the hidden bundle in her pocket. She would go to town, would reunite with her husband, would rejoin the fragile community of settlers trying to carve a life from these mountains. But she would not forget the lessons of the storm, the strength she had discovered within herself, or the unexpected kindness from a man her people called enemy. Some gifts transcended the boundaries of language and culture. Some debts could never truly be repaid. Outside, the sun gleamed on snow that had begun to melt, revealing hints of the earth below, patches of brown and green, promises of spring. It that had seemed impossible in the depths of the blizzard. Sarah watched a raven soar across the brilliant blue sky, free and unhurried. The mountain was small, Walking Hawk had said. Paths cross. She would hold him to that promise. The journey to Silverton nearly broke Sarah's newfound strength. Despite the doctor's preparations, extra blankets, heated stones at her feet, a specially constructed shelter within the sleigh to block the wind, the 6-hour descent through the mountain pass was a trial of endurance. Each jolt and lurch sent pain radiating through her still healing body. Liz, thankfully, slept through most of it, drugged by the rhythmic motion and wrapped securely against Sarah's chest. As they approached the town, Sarah found herself gripping the bundle Walking Hawk had left beneath her porch step. She had kept it hidden from the doctor, instinctively protecting this connection to the man who had saved them both. Now, as the first rough-hewn buildings of Silverton came into view, she slipped it deeper into her pocket. Silverton was hardly a metropolis, just a cluster of wooden structures strung along a windswept street, smoke rising from stone chimneys, muddy paths connecting the essential businesses of frontier life. But after weeks of isolation, it seemed overwhelming in its complexity and noise. "The doctor's office is there," Marshall Davis pointed, helping her down from the sleigh. "Your husband's been staying in the back room." Sarah nodded, suddenly hesitant. What version of James would be waiting? The charming dreamer who had courted her in Pennsylvania, the frustrated prospector whose temper had grown shorter as their prospects dimmed, or someone else entirely, transformed by his own brush with mortality? The doctor led her into a surprisingly warm waiting room, then through to a back area divided by canvas curtains into makeshift hospital wards. James occupied the farthest space, his leg elevated on pillows, his face turned toward the small window. "James," the doctor called softly. "I've brought them." Her husband turned, his expression transforming from distraction to disbelief to joy in the space of a heartbeat. "Sarah, my God!" His voice broke. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face pale beneath a weak stubble, his eyes brightened. "By what might have been fever or emotion. We thought you were dead," he whispered. "When the storm hit, I tried to get back. I swear I tried." "I know," Sarah said, moving to his bedside. She held Liz so he could see her clearly. "We survived." James reached out with trembling fingers to touch his daughter's face. "She's beautiful," he murmured. "When did she—" "During the first blizzard," Sarah replied, the memory still sharp despite everything that had followed. 7 days after. You left." James closed his eyes briefly, his face contorting. "I'm so sorry you were alone." "Not entirely," Sarah interjected, then hesitated. How much should she reveal? How would James react to the story of Walking Hawk's intervention? The doctor saved her from immediate decision. "Both mother and child need rest," he announced firmly. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've arranged a room for you at the boarding house. We can continue this reunion tomorrow when you've recovered from the journey." James looked ready to protest, but subsided at the doctor's stern glance. "Tomorrow, then," he agreed, squeezing Sarah's hand. "We have much to discuss." Sarah allowed herself to be led to the boarding house, a plain 2-story structure run by a bustling widow named Mrs. Henshaw. The woman clucked sympathetically over Liz, exclaimed at Sarah's pallor, and immediately set about providing hot water, clean towels, and a simple but hearty soup. "You poor dear," she said, stoking the small stove in the corner of Sarah's room. "Giving birth alone in that wilderness. It's not natural, not proper at all." Sarah didn't correct her assumption. The story was simpler without Walking Hawk's involvement, and she found herself strangely reluctant to share those days with anyone else. They belonged to her, to Liz, to the quiet Ute medicine man who had appeared and disappeared like something from a half-remembered dream. That night, in the unfamiliar comfort of the boarding house bed, Sarah examined Walking Hawk's parting gift. By lamplight, the bundle contained not only the bitter medicine she expected, but also a small deerskin pouch filled with dried herbs that smelled of sage and pine, a carved wooden amulet on a leather cord, and a folded square of birch bark with markings etched into its surface. Sarah studied the bark carefully, recognizing it as a map. Walking Hawk had drawn the contours of the mountain, marked the location of her cabin, and indicated several other places with symbols she couldn't decipher. One location, not far from. The cabin, but hidden in a fold of the mountain she had never explored, was marked with particular emphasis. She traced the route with her finger, memorizing it. Whatever Walking Hawk wanted her to find, he had considered it important enough to risk returning to her cabin after the marshal and doctor arrived. Sarah slept fitfully that night, dreaming of blizzards and smoke signals, of James falling through, ice of Walking Hawk's weathered hands cradling Liz. She woke before dawn, disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house, other lodgers stirring. Mrs. Henshaw already clattering in the kitchen below. Liz demanded immediate attention, her hungry cries piercing the early morning quiet. Sarah fed her, changed her, and dressed them both in the clean clothes Mrs. Henshaw had provided. Then, with nowhere else to go at such an early hour, she made her way back to the doctor's office. She found James awake, sitting up in bed attempting to shave with a small mirror propped against the water pitcher. His broken leg remained elevated, the splint and bandages stark white against the dark blankets. "Sarah," he smiled, setting aside the razor, "I didn't expect you so early." She sat beside him, arranging Liz in her lap. "I'm still accustomed to wilderness hours." He studied her face. "You look different." "I am different," she replied simply. James reached for her hand. "I thought I'd lost you both. When the storm hit and I couldn't get back up the mountain, I've never felt so helpless." His fingers tightened around hers. "But we've been given another chance. Once my leg heals, we'll start fresh." "Start fresh?" Sarah echoed. "I've been thinking while I've been laid up here," James continued, enthusiasm creeping into his voice. "The silver claim isn't working out, too remote, too difficult to develop without proper equipment. But I've heard about opportunities further. West, California, Oregon, real settlements, Sarah, with schools and churches and proper society. The old James, the dreamer, the schemer, always looking toward a brighter horizon just out of reach. Sarah felt a curious detachment as she listened to him outline this new vision, this next adventure that would surely lead to prosperity. "What about the cabin?" she asked when he paused for breath. "Our land," James shrugged. "We'll sell it or just abandon it. It's worthless, Sarah. Nearly killed us both." Worthless. The word struck her like a physical blow. That cabin had witnessed her darkest hours and her greatest strength. It had sheltered her daughter's first days of life. It had been the setting for Walking Hawk's quiet kindness, for lessons about survival that transcended cultural boundaries. "It's our home," she said softly. James looked at her with genuine bafflement. "It's a shack in the wilderness, Sarah. You nearly died there. How can you possibly want to go back?" She couldn't explain it, not in terms he would understand. How could she make him comprehend that the isolation that had nearly destroyed her had also revealed a core of strength she never knew she possessed? that the harsh landscape which had threatened her life had also provided its salvation through Walking Hawk's intervention. "We should discuss this later," she said instead, "when you're fully recovered." James frowned slightly but nodded. "Of course, there's no rush." He squeezed her hand again. "I'm just so grateful to have you both safe." The sincerity in his voice touched her. Whatever his faults, James did love her. He had tried to return during the storm, had risked his life and broken his leg in the attempt. His dreams of a better future, however impractical, were driven at least in part by his desire to provide for her and Liz. Sarah spent the morning with him, listening to his account of the accident that had left him stranded in Silverton, filling in the less dramatic parts of her own story. She still couldn't bring herself to mention Walking Hawk. The doctor visited midday, examined James's leg, and pronounced him healing well but not yet ready for travel. "Another 2 weeks at least," he declared. The break was clean, but any undue stress could cause problems. 2 weeks, James groaned after the doctor left. "I'll go mad being confined to this bed for that long." Sarah stood, adjusting Liz against her shoulder. "I'll come visit every day," she promised, "and Mrs. Henshaw mentioned bringing you books from her late husband's collection." James caught her wrist. "You will stay in town, won't you? Not go back?" "To that cabin?" The question caught her off guard. The marshal has offered to take me to collect more of our belongings," she hedged. "Just necessities." James's expression darkened. "It's not safe, Sarah. Not after what happened. I survived weeks there alone with a newborn during the worst blizzard." "In years," she reminded him, a hint of steel entering her voice. "I believe I can manage a brief visit with an armed escort." Her husband blinked, clearly unused to this assertiveness. "I suppose," he conceded reluctantly, "but promise me you'll return to town the same day." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The lie of omission sat uneasily in her chest, but she knew with sudden clarity that she had to return to the cabin, had to investigate the location Walking Hawk had marked on his map. There was something there he wanted her to find, something important enough to risk contact with white authorities. 2 days later, Marshal Davis made good on his offer to escort her back to the cabin. They set out at dawn, Liz secured in a carrying sling Mrs. Henshaw had fashioned, the sleigh loaded with supplies for the return journey. "Your husband's quite concerned about this trip," the marshal remarked as they cleared the town limits. "Made me promise 3 times to have you back by nightfall." Sarah managed a small smile. "He worries. Natural enough, after what you both went through." The journey up the mountain passed in comfortable silence after that. Sarah watched the familiar landmarks emerge, the lightning-struck pine that marked the turn toward their claim, the rocky outcropping that provided the first view of the valley, and finally the cabin itself, standing small but sturdy against the backdrop of endless forest. "Marshal." Davis helped her down from the sleigh. "I'll check the outbuildings while you gather your things," he offered. "Call if you need anything." Sarah nodded gratefully and entered the cabin alone. Inside, everything remained exactly as she had left it. The banked fire now cold ash, the bed with its rumpled blankets, the cradle Walking Hawk lined with soft furs. The air was still and cold, but not unwelcoming. She moved quickly, gathering the items she had promised James she would retrieve. His good coat, her mother's silver hand mirror, the small box containing what little jewelry she owned. Then, with an ear tuned to the marshal's movements outside, she consulted Walking Hawk's map once more. The marked location appeared to be northeast of the cabin, perhaps an hour's journey on foot under normal conditions. Impossible now, with the marshal waiting and Liz to consider. Sarah folded the map away with a pang of regret. Whatever Walking Hawk had intended her to find would have to wait. As she completed her packing, her eye caught something new, a small bundle on the mantel that hadn't been there when she left. With a quick glance toward the door, she retrieved it, finding another deerskin pouch containing a handful of unfamiliar seeds and a small carving of a bird in flight. The message was clear enough. Walking Hawk had returned, had left another gift, further evidence of his continuing connection to her and Liz, despite their separation. Sarah quickly tucked the pouch into her pocket alongside the first one as the marshal's boots sounded on the porch. "All set, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked, stamping snow from his feet. "Yes," she replied, hoisting her bundle of belongings. "Thank you for your patience." As they prepared to depart, Sarah cast one last look at the cabin. Not abandoned, she thought fiercely, not worthless, just waiting. The return to Silverton brought a rush of conflicting emotions. James greeted her with obvious relief, peppering her with questions about the journey and the condition of the cabin. She answered truthfully but selectively, omitting any mention of Walking Hawk's new gift or the map she carried. Days settled into a routine. Sarah visited James each morning, bringing Liz and news from the small town. Afternoons she spent helping Mrs. Henshaw with chores around the boarding house, paying for her room and board with labor since their funds were limited. In the evenings, she examined Walking Hawk's gifts and map by lamplight, wondering what awaited her in that marked location. As James's recovery progressed, his talk of leaving the mountains grew more specific. He had written to a cousin in Oregon, who described fertile farmland, established communities, and the possibility of a teaching position for Sarah. "Just think," he enthused, "you could return to what you love, teaching children rather than struggling to survive in isolation." The vision was undeniably appealing. Sarah did miss teaching, missed the rhythm of lessons, and the satisfaction of watching young minds develop. Life in Silverton, let alone their remote cabin, offered no such opportunities. Yet something held her back from embracing James's plans wholeheartedly. She found herself thinking of Walking Hawk's promised return, when the snow melted, of the yellow flowers in the meadow he had mentioned, of the map marking a place she had yet to discover. 2 weeks after their return to Silverton, as James began testing his weight on the healing leg, Sarah made a decision. She approached Marshal Davis after Sunday services, drawing him aside from the small congregation. "I need to return to our cabin," she said without preamble. "There's something I must retrieve." The marshal studied her face. "Your husband know about this?" "Not yet," she admitted. "He's still convinced the place holds nothing of value." Davis scratched his beard thoughtfully. "I'm riding that direction tomorrow to check on Wilkins' place. Could bring you along, but I can't linger." "I may need some time there," Sarah hesitated. Perhaps I could remain overnight and you could collect me on your return journey?" His eyebrows rose. "Alone with the little one? After what happened last time?" "It's not the same," Sarah insisted. "The weather is improving daily. I've learned much about survival these past months, and it's important, Marshal. Truly important. Something in her expression must have convinced him. "I'll bring you up tomorrow," he conceded, "and return the following afternoon. But Mrs. Mitchell, your husband won't thank me for this." "I'll speak with James," she promised. "The responsibility is mine, not yours." That evening, after a simple dinner in his room at the doctor's office, Sarah broached the subject. James reacted exactly as she had anticipated, with disbelief, then anger, then a kind of bewildered hurt. "I don't understand," he said for the third time. "What could possibly be so important that you'd risk returning alone?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "When I was alone during the storm, I made promises, to myself, to God. There's something I need to do to fulfill those promises." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had indeed made silent vows during those desperate days, vows about the kind of mother she would be, the kind of strength she would cultivate if given the chance to survive. James studied her face, his expression softening. "You've changed, Sarah. I'm not sure I recognize this new determination. Nearly dying will do that, she replied quietly. He reached for her hand. One night only, and Marshal Davis will return for you the next day? Yes, James sighed heavily. I don't like it, but I can see your mind's made up. He squeezed her fingers. Just come back to me, to us. We have a future to build together. The sincerity in his voice stirred something in Sarah's heart, a reminder of why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. His dreams had always been infectious, his belief in possibilities unshakable even in the face of setbacks. I will, she promised. And she meant it, though perhaps not in the way he understood. The next morning dawned clear and mild, a hint of the spring that would soon transform the mountains. Sarah prepared carefully, packing supplies for herself and Liz, including the medicine Walking Hawk had provided for her continuing recovery. Mrs. Henshaw fussed over her preparations, clearly disapproving but too polite to say so directly. Such a strange notion, she muttered, helping Sarah secure Liz in her carrying sling. A woman returning alone to that wilderness, not natural at all. Sarah merely smiled. Natural had taken on new meaning for her since the blizzard, since Walking Hawk's intervention. Nature was not merely the genteel gardens of her Pennsylvania childhood, but the raw power of storm and survival, the unexpected connections that formed when civilization's veneer was stripped away. James insisted on seeing her off, hobbling to the sleigh on crutches despite the doctor's protests. His farewell was tender, but worried, his eyes following the sleigh long after they had left the town behind. The journey to the cabin passed swiftly, the trail now clear of the worst snowdrifts. Marshal Davis maintained a steady pace, sharing occasional observations about the improving weather and the likelihood of an early spring. Sarah responded politely, but remained largely absorbed in her own thoughts, mentally reviewing Walking Hawk's map and the location she intended to seek. When they arrived at the cabin, Davis helped her inside with her supplies, built up the fire, and checked the immediate surroundings before preparing to depart. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon, he reminded her. If there's trouble before then... There won't be, Sarah assured him with more confidence than she felt. Thank you, Marshal, for understanding. He tipped his hat. Not sure I do understand, Mrs. Mitchell, but a person's entitled to their peculiarities in these parts. Just keep that door barred at night. After he left, Sarah stood in the center of the cabin, listening to the sleigh bells fade into distance. Silence descended. Not the ominous silence of the blizzard, but the quiet anticipation of a landscape poised between winter and spring. Liz stirred against her chest, making small sounds of hunger. Sarah settled by the fire to feed her, gazing at the flames and considering the journey that awaited them tomorrow. According to Walking Hawk's map, the marked location lay several miles northeast in a valley she had never visited. In her current state, with Liz to carry, it would take most of the day to reach it and return. Whatever waited there, it had been important enough for Walking Hawk to risk creating the map to return to her cabin after her departure. Sarah folded the map carefully and placed it alongside the small carved bird on the mantel. Tomorrow, she would discover what message the Ute medicine man had left for her. Tomorrow, she would honor the debt she could never fully repay. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the faint scent of pine and melting snow through the cracks around the door. Sarah breathed deeply, feeling something settle within her, a certainty, a purpose, beyond mere survival. For the first time since the birth, since Walking Hawk's departure, she felt truly at peace in her own skin, in this place that had nearly claimed her life, but had instead forged her anew. Tomorrow, she whispered to Liz, stroking her daughter's, a downy head. Tomorrow we follow the map. Dawn broke with gentle insistence, bathing the cabin in pale golden light. Sarah had been awake for hours, preparing for the journey ahead. She'd packed a small satchel with essentials: water, dried meat left by Walking Hawk, extra wrappings for Liz, and dressed in her sturdiest clothes. The birch bark maple open on the table as she memorized its markings one final time. The route would take her through unfamiliar territory, a narrow ravine beyond the northern ridge, then along what appeared to be a creek bed to a sheltered valley. What waited there she couldn't guess, but the urgency in Walking Hawk's marking was clear enough. "Ready for an adventure, little one?" she murmured to Liz, securing her in the carrier sling. The baby gurgled in response, her eyes bright with the peculiar alertness that sometimes made Sarah wonder how much the infant truly understood. Outside, the morning air carried the first tentative hints of spring, a subtle softening, a promise whispered on the breeze. Snow still blanketed much of the landscape, but patches of dark earth had begun to appear, and water dripped steadily from the cabin eaves. Sarah consulted her mental map and set off, establishing a steady pace that wouldn't tire her too quickly. The first leg of the journey followed a game trail she recognized, winding through towering pines whose branches occasionally released small showers of melting snow. Liz watched the falling crystals with fascination, reaching up with tiny fingers as if to catch them. An hour into their trek, the familiar territory gave way to the unknown. Sarah paused at the crest of the northern ridge, surveying the view that spread before them. The ravine Walking Hawk had cut a deep, winding path through the forest below, its steep sides partially visible where the snow had slid away to reveal dark stone. The descent was treacherous, slick with mud and half-melted snow. Sarah moved cautiously, testing each foothold before committing her weight, one arm always wrapped protectively around Liz. By the time they reached the bottom, her skirts were sodden and mud-spattered, but Liz remained dry and content in her sling. The ravine floor offered easier going. A small stream gurgled beneath patches of ice, and the high walls provided shelter from the wind. Sarah followed the watercourse as the map indicated, pausing occasionally to rest and nurse Liz. The sun climbed higher, its warmth becoming more pronounced in the sheltered space. Around midday, the ravine widened suddenly, opening into a secluded valley nestled between protective ridges. Sarah halted at the threshold, catching her breath at the unexpected beauty of the place. Despite the lingering snow, signs of awakening life were everywhere, green shoots pushing through the white blanket, the vibrant red of dogwood branches, a patch of exposed ground where tiny yellow flowers had already begun to bloom. This, then, was the place Walking Hawk had marked with such emphasis, a hidden pocket of life, invisible from the trails above, unknown to the settlers who traversed the main passes. But what specifically had he meant for her to find here? Sarah advanced slowly into the valley, eyes scanning for anything unusual. The valley floor sloped gently toward a central depression where the stream pooled before continuing its journey downstream. Near this pool, a cluster of large boulders created a natural shelter, and it was here that Sarah noticed the first sign of human presence, a carefully arranged pile of stones marking a small opening between the rocks. Her heart quickened. This was no natural formation, but a deliberate sign left for someone to find, for her to find. Approaching the stone marker, Sarah peered into the crevice beyond. A leather bundle lay within, protected from the elements by the overhanging rock. With trembling fingers she retrieved it, untying the thongs that secured the wrapping. Inside lay a collection of items that momentarily baffled her. Packets of seeds tied with sinew, dried roots and plants she didn't recognize. A small clay pot containing a pale salve, and a folded piece of rawhide covered with pictographs. Beneath these practical items rested something unexpected, a necklace of polished stone beads, simple but beautifully crafted. Sarah spread the contents on a flat rock, studying each item carefully. The seeds, she realized, must be for planting. Perhaps the yellow flowers Walking Hawk had mentioned as good medicine. The dried plants and salve were clearly medicinal, though their specific purposes remained mysterious. The necklace was a personal gift, its significance known only to the giver, but it was the rawhide message that drew her attention most intensely. The pictographs depicted a sequence of scenes. A small human figure, clearly female, standing beside what appeared to be a cabin. The same figure is later kneeling by stylized plants, a larger figure approaching from the mountains, a confrontation of some kind. And finally, the female figure, the larger figure, and a tiny figure she took to represent Liz, standing together near the valley. A warning? A prediction? Sarah couldn't be certain, but the message conveyed urgency. Walking Hawk expected someone to come, someone who might pose a threat, and he wanted her to return to this valley, to use these plants and seeds, to meet him here when the time was right. Sarah carefully rewrapped the items, securing them in her satchel. Whatever Walking Hawk's full message, she sensed it was vital to understand it before returning to Silverton, before committing to James's plans to leave the mountains altogether. The snap of a branch behind her shattered the valley's tranquility. Sarah whirled, clutching Liz protectively. A figure stood at the ravine entrance, a white man, tall and rangy, with a rifle slung over one shoulder and a face weathered by hard living. Not Walking Hawk, not Marshall Davis. Well, he drawled, advancing slowly into the valley. What have we here? A lady and her babe, all alone in Injun territory. Sarah's throat constricted with fear, but she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. "This land belongs to my husband and me," she stated, though she knew the claim was dubious this far from their cabin. The man chuckled, an unpleasant sound devoid of humor. "That's so. Funny, because my associates and I were told this whole area was open for claim jumping. No registered owners past the South Ridge." He gestured vaguely toward the direction she'd come from. "And here I find a white woman consorting with savages." Sarah froze. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play dumb, ma'am." He was closer now, close enough that she could see the dirt ingrained in the lines of his face, smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "Been watching this valley for days. Seen that old Ute medicine man coming and going. Seen him leave something here." His eyes dropped to her satchel. "Something valuable enough for you to make this journey alone." Understanding dawned with horrible clarity. This man had been watching the valley, had perhaps followed Walking Hawk, had certainly followed her, and now he wanted whatever treasure he imagined she'd retrieved. "There's nothing valuable here," she said steadily. "Just plants. Medicine. For my baby," he sneered. "Medicine, what do they call it? Everybody knows these mountains are riddled with gold. That old Injun's probably been mining it for years, keeping it secret from white folks. The misunderstanding would have been comical if not for the dangerous light in the man's eyes." Sarah took a careful step backward. "You're mistaken. I'm simply gathering herbs for my child's fever. My husband knows where I am, and Marshall Davis is coming to escort me back to town this afternoon." The mention of the marshal gave the stranger pause, but only briefly. "Then I'd best conclude our business quickly." He extended his hand. "Hand over whatever the Injun left you, and you and your little one can be on your way. No harm done." Sarah clutched the satchel tighter. "There's nothing here worth taking." The man's expression hardened. "I'll be the judge of that." He took another step forward, hand dropping to the knife at his belt. "Don't make this difficult, ma'am. Wouldn't want." That baby growing up without a mother, terror and fury surged through Sarah in equal measure. She'd survived childbirth alone during a blizzard, had faced starvation and freezing, had found strength she never knew she possessed. This man would not take Walking Hawk's gifts, would not threaten her child. "Stay back," she warned, reaching into her pocket, where she kept a small filleting knife for emergencies. The blade was pitifully inadequate against his weapons, but she would not yield without resistance. The standoff might have ended badly, if not for the arrow that suddenly thudded into the ground between them, quivering with the force of its impact. Both Sarah and her antagonist froze, eyes darting to the ridge above. Walking Hawk stood there, bow in hand, another arrow nocked and ready. Even at a distance, his posture conveyed absolute authority. Beside him stood two younger Ute men, similarly armed. "You trespass," Walking Hawk called, his accented English carrying clearly across the valley. "This place is sacred, protected." The white man's face contorted with rage and fear. "3 against 1 ain't fair odds, Injun," he spat. "Your presence here is not fair," Walking Hawk replied evenly. "Your threats against woman and child not fair. Leave now. Do not return." For a tense moment, Sarah thought the man might reach for his rifle, might force a conflict that would end in bloodshed. Instead, he slowly raised his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "Fine. Keep your damn valley and your medicine. But this ain't over." He fixed Sarah with a venomous glare. "You tell your husband some of us don't take kindly to white women who go native. Tell him Curtis Blackwood gives fair warning once, and only once." With that, he backed away, keeping his eyes on the ridge until he reached the ravine entrance. Then he turned and disappeared into the shadows beyond. Sarah's knees nearly buckled with relief. Walking Hawk and his companions descended swiftly into the valley, moving with the sure-footed grace of those who knew every stone and hollow intimately. Up close, Sarah could see concern etched in the medicine man's weathered features. "You found my message," he said, glancing at her satchel. "Yes," Sarah nodded, "though I don't understand all of it." Walking Hawk gestured for his companions to keep watch at the ravine entrance, then guided Sarah to the shelter of the boulders. "That man, Blackwood, he is trouble. Been hunting these mountains with others like him, not for game, for people." "For people?" Sarah echoed, horrified. Walking Hawk's expression was grim. "Bounty hunters. Colorado Territory pays for Ute scalps. Not official now, but some sheriffs still honor old papers. Some men still collect." Sarah felt sick. "That's barbaric." "Is way of the frontier," Walking Hawk replied with weary acceptance. "Why do I leave you a map? Why do I watch the cabin? These men, they see me visit. Think I will show you a gold mine or treasure." He shook his head at the deadly misunderstanding. "Now you are in danger too." The full weight of the situation descended on Sarah. Her journey to the valley, her connection to Walking Hawk, these had inadvertently drawn her into a conflict with dangerous implications. "The marshal is coming for me this afternoon," she said. "I should return to the cabin before he arrives." Walking Hawk nodded. "I will send Tall Fox with you," he indicated to one of the younger men. "Safer. Blackwood may wait on trail." "And the items you left?" Sarah asked, touching her satchel. "What do they mean?" The medicine man's expression softened slightly. "Seeds for healing plants. Grow them near the cabin. Flowers are good for fever. For woman troubles, for protection." He touched the satchel where the rawhide message lay. "Pictures tell a story. Your story. Our story. Future story." "And the necklace?" Sarah asked quietly. Walking Hawk's eyes met hers. "Belonged to my daughter. Now for your daughter. Connection between our peoples, between the past and the future." The simple gift held such profound meaning that Sarah found herself blinking back tears. "I don't know how to thank you for everything." "No thanks needed between friends," Walking Hawk replied. "But listen carefully now. Blackwood and others like him, they will tell stories in town, make trouble for you, for your husband. Say you betray your people by taking Ute medicine, by speaking with me." Sarah's mind raced ahead to the inevitable consequences. James's reaction to learning about Walking Hawk's role in their survival, the whispers that would spread through Silverton, the judgment of people like Mrs. Henshaw, who found any deviation from proper behavior suspicious and threatening. "What should I do?" she asked. Walking Hawk studied her face. "What does your heart tell you?" Sarah considered the question seriously. Her heart was divided between loyalty to James and his dreams, and the profound connection she felt to this place, to the lessons of survival, to Walking Hawk's quiet wisdom. "I don't know," she finally admitted, "but I know I can't pretend you never existed. I can't deny what you did for us." Walking Hawk nodded, satisfied with her honesty. "Then wait, listen, right path will become clear." He glanced at the sky, judging the time. "You must go now, long walk back to the cabin." The young Ute warrior, Tall Fox, stepped forward at Walking Hawk's gesture. His expression was guarded but not hostile as he prepared to escort Sarah back through the ravine. "One more thing," Walking Hawk said as Sarah secured Liz for the journey. "When yellow flowers bloom at the cabin, I will come. We will speak again." With that promise lingering between them, Sarah began the return journey, Tall Fox moving silently ahead to scout the path. Their progress was swifter than her morning trek, the Ute warrior finding easier routes through the difficult terrain. He spoke little, but his presence was reassuring in light of Blackwood's threats. They encountered no one on the trail, but Sarah remained vigilant, imagining hostile eyes tracking their movement through the trees. The satchel with Walking Hawk's gifts seemed to grow heavier with each step, weighted not just with physical contents, but with the responsibility they represented. The sun was beginning its western descent when they finally emerged from the forest. Within sight of her cabin, Tall Fox halted at the tree line, declining to approach the clearing directly. "Safe now," he said, his English less practiced than Walking Hawk's but clear enough. "I watch until you are inside." Sarah nodded her thanks. "Tell Walking Hawk I'll plant the seeds as soon as the ground thaws completely." The young warrior acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head, then melted back into the forest. Shadows with startling efficiency. Sarah crossed the clearing swiftly, relieved to find the cabin undisturbed in her absence. Once inside, she quickly barred the door and set about reviving the fire. Liz, who had been remarkably patient throughout the long journey, now demanded immediate attention with increasingly insistent cries. As Sarah tended to her daughter's needs, her mind churned with the implications of the day's events. Blackwood's threats could not be ignored. If he spread rumors in Silverton about her association with the Ute, it would create difficulties not just for her, but for James as well. Frontier communities were notoriously suspicious of Indian sympathizers, and such a label could damage James's business prospects, could even make them targets for violence from men like Blackwood. Yet the alternative, denying Walking Hawk's existence, hiding the truth of their survival, felt like an unforgivable betrayal. How could she dishonor the man who had saved their lives? How could she reject the wisdom and kindness he had shown when everyone else had abandoned them to their fate? As twilight settled over the cabin, Sarah made a fire and prepared a simple meal from her supplies. The flickering light caught the polished surface of the stone beads Walking Hawk had gifted for Liz. Sarah lifted the necklace, letting it pool in her palm, a tangible connection between worlds, between peoples, between possible futures. Whatever path she chose, it would not be an easy one. The frontier demanded hard choices, forced confrontations with truths that more settled communities could afford to ignore or deny. She had come west, seeking adventure, seeking a life less constrained by convention. Now she had found it, though, not in the form she had anticipated. A sound outside startled her from her reverie, the distinctive rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. Marshal Davis, arriving as promised to escort her back to Silverton. Back to James, back to a decision that would shape all their futures. Sarah rose, gathering her resolve along with her belongings. She tucked Walking Hawk's gifts securely in. Her bag, all except the necklace, which she carefully placed around Liz's neck. The beads rested against the infant's chest like a talisman, a silent declaration of connection that transcended the arbitrary boundaries men drew across landscapes and between peoples. The marshal's knock came firm but not urgent. Sarah opened the door, composing her features into a calm she did not entirely feel. "Ready to head back to town, Mrs. Mitchell?" Davis asked, tipping his hat. Sarah nodded, stepping out into the gathering dusk. "Yes, I believe I am." In more ways than one, she thought, as she cast a final glance at the cabin. She was ready to face the truths she had discovered in the wilderness, to honor the debts she owed, to chart a course that recognized the reality of her transformed understanding. The journey back to Silverton would be the simplest part of what lay ahead. The return journey to Silverton unfolded in relative silence. Marshal Davis made a few attempts at conversation, remarking on the improving weather and asking vague questions about Sarah's time at the cabin, but seemed to sense her preoccupation and eventually fell quiet. For her part, Sarah was grateful for the reprieve, using the hours to organize her thoughts and prepare for what awaited in town. Twilight was deepening into true dark by the time they arrived. Silverton's buildings clustered against the night, windows glowing with lamplight, the saloon's piano audible even at the town's edge. The familiar sounds of civilization felt jarringly discordant after the profound silence of the mountains. "I can take you straight to your husband if you'd like," the marshal offered, as they approached the doctor's office. Sarah adjusted Liz against her shoulder. "Thank you, but I'd prefer to go to the boarding house first," she replied. "I need to change and settle Liz before visiting James." Davis nodded, guiding the sleigh toward Mrs. Henshaw's establishment instead. "As you wish, ma'am." He helped her down, handed her the small bundle of belongings, then hesitated. "Mrs. Mitchell, I don't mean to pry, but that is everything." "Well, with you?" The unexpected concern in his voice caught Sarah off guard. "Why do you ask?" He shifted uncomfortably. "There's been talk in town. A trapper came through this morning claiming he'd seen a white woman consorting with Utes up near your property, so Blackwood had already begun spreading his poison." Sarah's chest tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "People will talk about anything in a town this small, Marshal, especially about a woman who chooses to live away from their supervision." Davis studied her face. "That they will, ma'am. That they will." He tipped his hat. "Good evening to you." As the marshal's sleigh pulled away, Sarah steeled herself and entered the boarding house. Mrs. Henshaw appeared immediately, her round face alight with curiosity, barely masked as concern. "There you are. We were beginning to worry. Your husband's been asking after you all day." The older woman's eyes darted to Liz, then back to Sarah's face, clearly searching for signs of, what, savagery, corruption? "You must be exhausted after your adventure." "It was hardly an adventure, Mrs. Henshaw," Sarah replied calmly. "Just a necessary errand to collect some items from our cabin." "Of course, dear, of course." Mrs. Henshaw reached for Liz. "Let me hold the little one while you freshen up. You look positively wild." Sarah relinquished her daughter reluctantly, aware of her mud-spattered skirts and wind-blown hair. "I won't be long." In the privacy of her room, Sarah quickly changed into her cleanest remaining dress and rebraided her hair. The satchel containing Walking Hawk's gifts she hid beneath the mattress. Not a perfect hiding place, but better than carrying it with her to the doctor's office where James would certainly question its contents. As she prepared to leave, she hesitated, then removed the stone bead necklace from Liz's neck and tucked it into her pocket instead. Better not to provide visible evidence of her connection to the Ute until she had spoken with James. The weight of the beads against her hip felt like a silent promise, to Walking Hawk, to Liz, to herself. Mrs. Henshaw was rocking Liz in the parlor when Sarah descended. "Such a good baby," the woman cooed. "Takes after her father, I'd say. She has his eyes." Sarah bit back a correction. Liz's eyes were unmistakably her own, not James's. But contradicting the woman would only invite more questions. "Thank you for watching her. We'll be back shortly." Outside, Silverton's main street bustled with evening activity. Miners, fresh from their claims, crowded the saloon. Merchants closed up their shops, and a group of men stood smoking outside the general store, their conversation halting as Sarah passed. She felt their eyes following her, heard the murmur of resumed discussion in her wake. The doctor's office was quiet by comparison. The young assistant at the desk, barely more than a boy, looked up with a nervous expression as she entered. "Mrs. Mitchell," he stammered, "your husband's been asking for you." "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked, suddenly alarmed. "No, Mom, he's just anxious to see you." The boy hesitated. "And there have been some visitors, men asking questions about your cabin, about your associations." Sarah's unease deepened. "What men?" "Don't rightly know, Ma'am. Rough types. One called himself Blackwood. So he had wasted no time." Sarah squared her shoulders. "Thank you for telling me." James was sitting up in bed when she entered his room, his splintered leg propped on pillows, his face drawn with worry that transformed into visible relief when he saw her. "Sarah, thank God." He reached for her hands, pulling her down beside him. "I've been half out of my mind imagining all sorts of disasters. I'm perfectly fine," she assured him, settling on the edge of the bed. "The cabin was just as we left it. Marshal Davis delivered me there and back safely." James's fingers tightened around hers. "Did you encounter anyone while you were there? Anyone at all?" The directness of the question confirmed her fears. Blackwood had indeed been spreading stories. Sarah met her husband's gaze steadily. "Why do you ask?" James released her hands and ran his fingers through his already disheveled hair. "There's a man in town, Blackwood, making wild claims about seeing you with Indians near our property, saying you were involved with them somehow." "And you believed him?" Sarah asked quietly. "Of course not," James protested, though something flickered in his eyes. "But people are talking, Sarah. It's ugly talk." Sarah stood, moving to the window. Outside, stars were emerging in the deepening night sky. The same stars that had watched over her during the blizzard, that had witnessed Walking Hawk's arrival with his life-saving medicine. "What if it were true?" she asked, her back still to James. "What if I had encountered Utes near our cabin?" A heavy silence filled the room. When James finally spoke, his voice was strained. "What are you saying, Sarah?" She turned to face him. "I'm asking what you would think, what you would feel, if I told you that a Ute medicine man had saved your wife and daughter during that blizzard when everyone else, including you, had abandoned us to our fate." The color drained from James's face. "That's not... You can't possibly... His name is Walking Hawk," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He came the night Liz and I would have frozen to death. He built up the fire, made medicine for my fever, hunted food when our supplies ran out." "Stop," James whispered. "This can't be true." "He stayed with us for days until the storm passed, taught me words in his language, showed me how to survive." Sarah crossed back to the bed. "Without him, you would have returned to find 2 frozen corpses, James, your wife and your daughter." James stared at her, his expression cycling through disbelief, shock, and something darker. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Why let me believe you had survived alone?" "I tried to that first day," Sarah reminded him. "But you were so focused on your plans to leave, on dismissing the cabin and our life there as worthless because it nearly killed you," James interrupted, "because I wanted better for us." "But you never asked about the truth of what happened," Sarah pressed. You were so ready to leave it all behind that you never questioned how a woman who had just given birth could possibly have survived alone in that blizzard. James looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The truth of her words hung between them, undeniable. "What happened today?" he finally asked. "At the cabin." Sarah sighed. "I followed a map Walking Hawk had left for me to a valley where he had stored medicines and seeds." She omitted the confrontation with Blackwood, not wanting to escalate James's alarm. "He's been protecting us, James, even after we came to town." "Protecting us," James echoed hollowly. "A savage." The word stung. "Don't call him that. He has more wisdom, more kindness than most civilized men I've known." "Do you hear yourself?" James hissed, grabbing her wrist. "You sound like you've been bewitched. These people are dangerous, Sarah. They're not like us." "No," she agreed, gently but firmly removing her wrist from his grip. "They're not like us. And perhaps that's why Walking Hawk chose to help strangers in need, while the good Christian folk of Silverton never thought to check on a woman alone in a blizzard with a baby coming." The harsh truth landed like a physical blow. James recoiled, his face flushing with shame or anger, perhaps both. "What do you want from me?" he demanded. "To thank this savage for doing what I couldn't? To welcome him into our lives when his very presence puts us in danger?" "I want you to acknowledge the truth," Sarah replied. "I want you to understand that our survival, our future, is tied to this place in ways I'm only beginning to comprehend." James studied her face, his expression softening slightly. "You've changed, Sarah. The woman I married would never have spoken this way." "The woman you married doesn't exist anymore," she said gently. "She died during that storm and was reborn as someone stronger, someone who sees the world more clearly." He looked away, his jaw working. "You know what this means for us in town. The rumors have already started. Blackwood is telling anyone who'll listen that you've gone native, that you can't be trusted, and that matters more than the truth?" "Truth doesn't count for much on the frontier," James replied bitterly, "especially when it contradicts what people want to believe." Sarah moved to the window again, gazing out at the darkened street. In the distance, the mountains loomed, their snow-capped peaks silvered by moonlight. Somewhere in those mountains, Walking Hawk was watching, waiting for the yellow flowers to bloom beside her cabin. "We need to leave, Sarah," James continued, his voice earnest now. "As soon as my leg heals. My cousin's letter from Oregon arrived yesterday. There's land available near Portland, good farmland. We can start fresh where no one knows us, where these rumors won't follow." The vision he painted was tempting in its simplicity, a clean slate, a conventional life among her own kind, safety for Liz. But something in Sarah rebelled at the thought of running away, of denying the connection she had formed with this harsh, beautiful place and the people who had inhabited it long before settlers arrived. "And what about your silver claim?" she asked. "Your dreams of striking it rich?" James sighed. "Dreams change. After nearly losing you and Liz, I just want us to be safe, to be together." His sincerity touched her. Despite everything, James did love her. He wanted to protect his family, even if his methods and understanding were limited by his perspective. "I need time," Sarah said finally. "Time to consider what's best for all of us." James nodded reluctantly. "Time I can give you, but not much of it. The doctor says I can travel in 2 weeks, and I'd like to be on our way before spring brings. More prospectors through town, more men like Blackwood." Sarah returned to the bed and took his hand. 2 weeks, then, to decide our future. Later, walking back to the boarding house with Liz drowsing against her shoulder, Sarah pondered the weight of the choice before her. The street was quieter now, the saloon's piano silenced, only a few figures moving in the shadows between buildings. One of these detached itself as she passed, stepping into her path with deliberate menace. Blackwood. "Evening, Mrs. Mitchell." he drawled, tobacco juice staining his unkempt beard. "Lovely night for a stroll." Sarah held Liz closer. "Excuse me," she said firmly, attempting to step around him. He shifted to block her way. "Not so fast. We've got unfinished business, you and I." "We have no business whatsoever," Sarah replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Please move aside." Blackwood leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "I told your husband about your Injun friends, told everybody what I saw up there in that valley. Nobody believed me at first, but they're starting to wonder. Starting to ask questions about what really happened during that blizzard. My husband knows the truth," Sarah stated, though it was only partially accurate. "Now kindly step aside before I call for the marshal." Blackwood's eyes narrowed, but he took a half-step back. "You think you're protected here in town? Think again. Folks don't take kindly to women who forget their place, who take up with savages." "The only savage I see is standing before me," Sarah replied with quiet dignity. "A man who threatens a mother and her child in the middle of a public street." Something dangerous flashed in Blackwood's eyes, but before he could respond, the door of the general store opened, spilling light onto the street. The shopkeeper emerged, locking up for the night. "Everything all right, Mrs. Mitchell?" he called, noticing the confrontation. "Fine, thank you," Sarah answered loudly. "Mr. Blackwood was just leaving." The bounty hunter's lips curled in a sneer, but he backed away. "This ain't over," he muttered. "Not by a long shot." Sarah hurried the remaining distance to the boarding house, her heart pounding. Blackwood's threat was not idle. She understood that with bone-deep certainty. As long as she remained in Silverton, as long as her connection to Walking Hawk was known, she and possibly Liz would be in danger from men like him. Yet the alternative, fleeing with James to Oregon, leaving behind the truth of their survival and the debt she owed, felt equally impossible. Mrs. Henshaw was waiting up, her curiosity palpable as Sarah entered. "How is your husband, dear? Eager to have his family back home, I imagine." "He's recovering well," Sarah replied vaguely, heading for the stairs. "If you'll excuse me, it's been a long day." "Of course, dear. Oh, a package came for you while you were out." The older woman retrieved a small bundle from a shelf. "Most peculiar delivery. Found it on the porch with your name on it. No one saw who left it." Sarah accepted the package with a murmur of thanks, recognizing Walking Hawk's distinctive wrapping method immediately. Had he come to town himself, the risk would have been enormous. Alone in her room, Sarah settled Liz in the small cradle Mrs. Henshaw had provided, then carefully unwrapped the mysterious package. Inside lay a small leather pouch and another piece of birch bark with markings etched into its surface. This time the message was clearer. A map showing a route from Silverton to a location deep in the mountains, far from the established trails. At the destination, Walking Hawk had drawn the symbol for his people's summer camp. The pouch contained something unexpected. A silver medallion on a leather cord, its surface inscribed with an intricate pattern that Sarah recognized from Walking Hawk's medicine pouch, a protective symbol, a talisman against evil. The message was clear. Walking Hawk was offering sanctuary, a place of safety away from Blackwood and his ilk, away from the suspicious whispers of Silverton. Sarah sank onto the bed, the medallion cool against her palm. The choice before her had just become more complex, more impossible. Stay with James, flee to Oregon, and leave behind the truth of their salvation. Return to their cabin alone with Liz, trying to forge an independent life despite the dangers. Or accept Walking Hawk's offer of protection among his people, a step no white woman in her right mind would contemplate. Each path held its own perils, its own sacrifices. Each would reshape her future in irrevocable ways. She was still pondering these impossible choices when a soft knock came at her door. Sarah hastily tucked the medallion into her pocket alongside the bead necklace and opened the door a crack. Mrs. Henshaw stood there, her normally ruddy face pale with distress. "Dr. Reynolds is here," she whispered. "For you. He says it's urgent." Cold fear gripped Sarah's heart. "James, just come," the older woman urged. "Quickly." Sarah checked that Liz was still sleeping peacefully, then followed Mrs. Henshaw downstairs. The doctor waited in the parlor, his hat in his hands, his expression grave. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began without preamble, "I'm afraid there's been a development. Your husband insisted I come to you immediately." "What's happened?" Sarah demanded, fear sharpening her voice. "A group of men, Blackwood among them, came to the office after you left. They were agitated, making accusations about your time alone at the cabin, about your supposed alliance with the Utes." The doctor hesitated. "They threatened to form a committee to investigate, to take matters into their own hands if necessary." "A committee," Sarah echoed, understanding the implication. In frontier towns, such committees often served as judge, jury, and executioner, operating outside official law. "Your husband is concerned for your safety," the doctor continued. "He asked me to tell you to prepare to leave town, tomorrow if possible. He says to take whatever money you have and book passage on the morning stage to Denver. He'll join you as soon as he's able to travel." Sarah's mind raced. "Leave tomorrow." "But his leg is not yet healed enough for such a journey," the doctor confirmed. "But he insists you and the baby must go immediately. The situation has become volatile, Mrs. Mitchell. These men have been drinking, spreading wild stories. It's not safe for you here anymore." The reality of the threat settled over Sarah like a physical weight. She had underestimated how quickly Blackwood could turn the town against her, how eagerly people would believe the worst of a woman who defied convention. "Thank you for coming," she said finally. "Please tell James I'll consider his advice carefully." After the doctor left, Sarah returned to her room and sank onto the bed beside Liz's cradle. The path before her had suddenly narrowed, forcing an immediate decision rather than the 2 weeks' contemplation James had promised. She could flee to Denver as James suggested, abandoning him temporarily for her and Liz's safety. She could return to their cabin, though Blackwood surely knew its location and would find her there. Or she could follow Walking Hawk's map to the Ute summer camp, seeking sanctuary among people Silverton considered enemies, but who had shown her nothing but kindness. No option was without grave risk. No choice was perfect. Liz stirred in her sleep, making the small snuffling sounds that usually preceded waking. Sarah reached into the cradle, stroking her daughter's cheek with a gentle finger. What future did she want for this child? What example did she wish to set? The medallion and necklace weighed heavy in her pocket, tangible reminders of a debt that could never be fully repaid. The birch bark map lay on the bed beside her, offering a path few white women would ever consider taking. Sarah Mitchell had come west seeking adventure, seeking a life beyond the narrow confines of her Pennsylvania upbringing. She had found more than she bargained for. Hardship, yes, but also strength, wisdom, and unexpected alliance. Now the true test of that strength had arrived. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine and promise from the mountains, beyond Silverton. Sarah closed her eyes, listening to the sound of her daughter's breathing, feeling the weight of the medallion against her hip. By morning, she would have made her choice. Dawn had not yet broken when Sarah finished her preparations. She moved quietly through the darkened room, gathering only what was essential: clothing for herself and Liz, the medicines Walking Hawk had provided, the small amount of money she and James had managed to save. Everything fit into a single canvas bag, a testament to how little they truly possessed despite James's grand dreams. Liz watched from the cradle, unusually quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. When Sarah lifted her, the baby nuzzled against her neck, seeking comfort and warmth in the pre-dawn chill. "We'll be all right," Sarah whispered, as much to herself as to her daughter. She fastened Walking Hawk's stone bead necklace around Liz's neck and tucked the silver medallion into the baby's blankets. Whatever path she chose, they would need all the protection they could muster. A soft knock at her door startled her. Sarah tensed, one hand instinctively moving to the knife she had tucked into her belt. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Mrs. Henshaw's voice came, through the wood, pitched low with urgency. "Are you awake?" Sarah opened the door cautiously. The landlady stood in the hallway, her hair still in night braids, her face creased with worry. "There are men gathering at the saloon," she whispered. "Blackwood and others. They're talking about coming here at first light. Something about questioning you properly about your associations." Sarah's blood ran cold. "How do you know this?" "My nephew works at the saloon. He came by on his way home." Mrs. Henshaw's eyes dropped to Sarah's packed bag. "You're leaving?" It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. "It's not safe for us here anymore." The older woman hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pressed a small pouch into Sarah's hand. "The stage doesn't leave until 8. They'll be watching for you by then." Sarah opened the pouch to find several gold coins, more money than she had seen in one place since leaving Pennsylvania. "Mrs. Henshaw, I can't accept—" "Take it," the woman insisted. I lost a daughter once. Fever took her and her baby. I couldn't help them then." Her eyes lifted to meet Sarah's. "But I can help you now." The unexpected alliance brought a lump to Sarah's throat. "Thank you." Mrs. Henshaw nodded briskly, reverting to her practical demeanor. "There's a back way out through the kitchen. My brother has a wagon ready behind the chandler's shop. He'll take you as far as the North Fork. After that," she shrugged, leaving. "The rest unspoken." "Why are you helping us?" Sarah asked, genuinely puzzled. Mrs. Henshaw had always seemed the epitome of frontier propriety, the sort of woman who enforced social boundaries rather than helped others escape them. The landlady's expression softened. "Your husband told me how you survived that blizzard, about the Ute medicine man." At Sarah's surprised look, she added, "He came to me last night after the doctor left, told me everything, said I needed to understand what kind of woman you truly are." James had defended her. The realization struck Sarah with unexpected force. Despite his shock, his discomfort with Walking Hawk's role in their survival, James had chosen to tell the truth to Mrs. Henshaw, had sought to protect Sarah by enlisting the older woman's help. "What did you think?" Sarah asked. "When did he—" "Told you?" Mrs. Henshaw straightened her apron with a brisk gesture. "I thought anyone who survived what you did deserves better than a lynch mob at her door." She glanced down the hallway. "Now hurry. There isn't much time." The escape from the boarding house unfolded like a dream. The silent descent down the back stairs, the kitchen with its lingering smells of yesterday's bread, the door that opened onto a narrow alley still draped in night shadows. Mrs. Henshaw's brother waited, as promised. A taciturn man who helped Sarah into his wagon without a word, covered her and Liz with a rough blanket, then set off at an unhurried pace that wouldn't attract attention. They left Silverton as the first grey light of dawn seeped into the sky. Sarah peered from beneath the blanket as they passed the doctor's office, wondering if James was awake, if he knew she had chosen a different path than the one he had suggested. She had left a letter with Mrs. Henshaw, explaining as best she could. Whether it would be enough, whether he would understand, she couldn't know. The wagon creaked steadily northward, following the main road initially, then turning onto a less traveled track that wound through stands of pine. After perhaps an hour, they reached a fork in the road where a swift-flowing creek gurgled beneath a crude wooden bridge. Mrs. Henshaw's brother halted the wagon. "This is as far as I go," he announced, his first words since they had left town. "North Fork, anyone asks, I never saw you." Sarah emerged from beneath the blanket, stiff from the journey, but grateful. Thank you for the risk you've taken. The man shrugged. Weren't right what they were planning. Man like Blackwood. He spat to the side of the road. Known him too long to trust him. Sarah climbed down from the wagon, settling Liz more comfortably, in her sling. Which way leads deeper into the mountains? He pointed to the narrower of the two paths, the one that curved eastward along the creek. That way. But there's nothing up there, except wilderness and Indians. That's what I'm counting on, Sarah replied. The man studied her for a long moment, then reached beneath his seat and produced a small revolver. Take this. 6 shots. Better than nothing if you run into trouble. Sarah accepted the weapon with mixed feelings. She had never fired a gun, had no desire to harm anyone, but the reality of her situation, a woman alone with an infant in unforgiving territory, demanded practical precautions. I hope not to need it, she said honestly. Hope. All you want. Be prepared anyway. With that frontier wisdom imparted, he flicked the reins and turned his wagon around, leaving Sarah standing alone at the crossroads. According to Walking Hawk's map, the path to the Ute summer camp would follow this creek for several miles before climbing into higher elevations. The journey would take at least 2 days on foot, perhaps longer with Liz to carry. Sarah adjusted her pack, checked that the revolver was secure but accessible, and began walking. The morning passed in steady progress. The path was clear enough, though clearly not maintained for wagons or regular travel. Wild roses grew along the creek banks, their new green leaves a promise of blooms to come. Squirrels chattered in the pines, and once a deer bounded across the trail ahead, pausing to regard Sarah with liquid eyes before disappearing into the forest. By midday, Sarah was weary but determined. She stopped to rest beside the creek, using the opportunity to feed Liz and eat some of the provisions Mrs. Henshaw had packed: hard bread, dried apples, and jerky, tough enough to require serious effort but rich with sustenance. As she prepared to resume her journey, a sound in the underbrush made her freeze. Not the rustle of small wildlife, but the deliberate movement of something or someone larger. Sarah reached slowly for the revolver, her heart pounding. "No need for that," came a familiar voice as Walking Hawk emerged from the trees. "Unless you plan to shoot your guide." Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely she felt momentarily lightheaded. "How did you find me?" The medicine man approached, his expression grave but his eyes warm. "Been watching Silverton, saw the men gathering. Knew you would need to leave." He glanced at the path behind her. "Didn't expect you on this trail so early." "I had help," Sarah explained. "Friends I didn't know I had." Walking Hawk nodded as if this made perfect sense. People see the truth, eventually, even when they don't want to. His gaze shifted to Liz, noting the stone bead necklace with quiet approval. "You decided, then, to come to our camp?" Sarah hesitated. The decision had been made in the pressure of immediate danger, without full consideration of what it truly meant. To seek sanctuary among the Ute, to bring her child into that unfamiliar world. The implications stretched far beyond simple safety. "I don't know what I've decided," she admitted. "Only that I couldn't stay in Silverton, and I couldn't go to Denver as James wanted." Walking Hawk considered this, then gestured for her to follow him off the main path. "Come, safer route. We talk." While walking, he led her on a game trail that paralleled the creek but remained hidden from the main path by dense undergrowth. As they walked, Sarah found herself studying him anew, the straight posture that belied his age, the weathered hands that moved with such precise grace, the quiet dignity he carried even in these difficult circumstances. "Your husband." "Walking," Hawk said after they had walked in silence for some time. "He knows the truth now?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "I told him everything, about how you saved us, about the medicines, about our time together during the storm." "And?" He was shocked. Confused, angry at first, Sarah ducked beneath a low-hanging branch, but in the end he defended me, told others the truth when it mattered. Walking Hawk nodded. Good man, then, despite his fear. The simple assessment surprised Sarah. You don't resent him for leaving me alone during the blizzard, for his distrust of your people. What purpose is resentment? Walking Hawk asked. Fear is in all men's hearts. White, Ute doesn't matter. What matters is what man does despite fear. His wisdom silenced her for a time as they continued their journey. The path climbed steadily now, moving away from the creek and into thicker forest. Liz dozed against Sarah's chest, lulled by the rhythmic motion of walking. They will look for you, Walking Hawk said eventually. Men like Blackwood don't forget, don't forgive. I know, Sarah acknowledged. That's why I can't return to our cabin, even if I wanted to. And Denver, Walking Hawk asked. With husband, when will his leg heals? Sarah shook her head. Running away feels like betraying everything I've learned, everything you taught me. Walking Hawk was silent for several paces, then gestured toward a fallen log beside the trail. Rest, need to talk. They sat side by side, the forest quiet around them, except for the distant call of a jay. Walking Hawk produced a small pouch of pemmican, offering some to Sarah before taking a piece himself. Your path is difficult, he said finally, not because choices are bad, but because you see clearly now. See all sides. I don't know what to do, Sarah admitted. I can't stay with your people forever. I can't return to Silverton. I don't want to flee to Oregon or Denver, starting over as if nothing has changed. Walking Hawk studied her face. What does your heart tell you? Sarah considered the question seriously. That I want to honor what I've learned about strength, about survival, about the connections between people that transcend the boundaries we create. Good answer, Walking Hawk nodded. But still not. A path. He was right, of course. Philosophy couldn't protect Liz from the elements or feed them through the coming seasons. Sarah needed a practical solution, not just an ethical stance. There's a fourth choice, Walking Hawk said after a moment. Not staying with Ute, not running to a big city, not returning to danger. Sarah looked at him questioningly. Trading post, he explained. 3 days' journey west of summer camp, run by Frenchman Jean-Baptiste. Good man, respects all people, trades fair, needs help since my wife died last winter. A trading post, Sarah echoed, considering the possibility. A place where cultures intersected, where her knowledge of both worlds might be an asset rather than a liability. Baptiste trades with Ute, with trappers, with passing settlers, Walking Hawk continued. Needs someone who can speak to all, who understands different ways, someone who can teach his children. He has children? Walking Hawk nodded. 2 boys, 1 girl. No mother now. Baptiste is my friend. Many years. I speak for you, if you wish. Offer stunned Sarah with its practicality and its potential. A place where she could use her teaching skills again, where Liz could grow up understanding both worlds, where she would have legitimate work and purpose while maintaining her connection to Walking Hawk and his teachings. Why would you do this? And for me? She asked softly. Walking Hawk's weathered face softened. You remind me of my daughter, strong heart, clear eyes. She would have approved of helping you find your path. The simple honesty of his answer touched Sarah deeply. She looked down at Liz, sleeping peacefully against her chest. The stone bead necklace gleamed against the baby's skin, a tangible connection between Walking Hawk's lost daughter and her own child, between past and future. I would like to meet this Baptiste, she said finally, to see if such an arrangement might work. Walking Hawk nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good. We continue to summer camp first. Rest there. Then I will take you to the trading post when ready. They resumed their journey with renewed purpose, moving steadily, higher into the mountains as afternoon shadows lengthened across the trail. Sarah felt a curious lightness despite the physical demands of the trek. For the first time since the blizzard, since Walking Hawk's arrival in her life, she glimpsed a way forward that honored all she had experienced without requiring impossible sacrifices. As twilight approached, Walking Hawk led her to a small clearing where the remains of an old campfire indicated previous use. "Stop here for the night," he announced. "Safe place, hidden from the main trail." Together they prepared a simple camp, Walking Hawk gathering wood and building a small, nearly smokeless fire, while Sarah arranged a sleeping area for herself and Liz using pine boughs and her blanket. The domestic cooperation reminded her of those days in the cabin during the storm when they had developed a wordless understanding of each other's movements and needs. After a meal of pemmican supplemented with early spring roots, Walking Hawk gathered. They sat beside the fire as darkness settled around them. Liz lay awake in Sarah's lap, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "What will you tell your husband?" Walking Hawk asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Sarah had been pondering this very question throughout the day's journey. "The truth," she said finally, "that I've found a place where Liz and I can be safe, where I can work and build a new life, that when his leg is healed, he can join us if he wishes. And if he doesn't wish," the possibility sent a pang through Sarah's heart. Despite their differences, despite the strain of recent events, she still loved James, still valued the dreams they had once shared, even if those dreams had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. "Then I will honor his choice," she said softly, "as I hope he will honor mine." Walking Hawk nodded, poking at the fire thoughtfully. Sometimes paths separate doesn't mean journey was wrong. His simple wisdom encompassed so much. The nature of love and loss, the inevitability of change, the value of each step even if the destination shifts. Sarah found herself blinking back tears, overcome by the profound understanding this man offered so casually, so consistently. "Thank you," she said, the words entirely inadequate for the gift he had given her, not just survival, but a way of seeing the world that transcended the narrow boundaries of her upbringing. Walking Hawk acknowledged her gratitude with a slight inclination of his head, then gestured toward the blanket. "Sleep now, long journey tomorrow." Sarah settled beside the fire, Liz cradled in the crook of her arm, the revolver within easy reach, though she doubted she would need it with a Walking Hawk standing watch. As she drifted toward sleep, her mind wandered back to that first night in the cabin, when she had been so certain death was approaching, when the knock at her door had seemed like a dream or a hallucination. How far she had come since then. How much she had learned about strength, about survival, about the unexpected connections that could form between people from worlds that were supposed to remain separate. Whatever challenges lay ahead at the trading post with James in creating a new life for herself and Liz, Sarah knew she faced them with resources she had never possessed before. Not just the practical skills Walking Hawk had taught her, but the inner resilience she had discovered within herself during those desperate days. The fire crackled softly as Sarah fell asleep, its warmth a promise in the mountain night. Above, stars scattered across the vast sky like the stone beads of Walking Hawk's necklace, connecting heaven and earth, past and future, all the separate paths that human feet might travel. 2 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of the trading post, watching as a familiar figure approached on horseback along the dusty trail from the east. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, where Jean-Baptiste's children played under the watchful eye of his elderly mother. Inside, the Frenchman was teaching Liz to smile, the baby propped in a cradle he had carved himself as a welcome gift. Sarah shaded her eyes, her heart quickening as the rider drew nearer. The slight favouring of his left leg was visible even at a distance. James, still recovering, but well enough to make the journey from Silverton. He had received her letter then, had chosen to seek her out rather than continuing to Oregon alone. What? That choice meant reconciliation, farewell, some negotiated middle ground remained to be seen. But Sarah faced the moment without fear, secure in the life she had begun to build at the trading post, in the respect she had earned from Baptiste and his family, in the continued wisdom and friendship Walking Hawk provided during his regular visits. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. James reined in his mount at the edge of the yard, gazing up at the trading post's weathered facade before his eyes found Sarah in the doorway. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, measuring the changes time and circumstance had wrought. Then James dismounted, moving with the careful deliberation of a man still healing, and Sarah stepped down from the porch to meet him. Whatever came next, whatever path they chose, together or separately, she would face it with the strength born of storm and survival, with the wisdom gained from Walking Hawk's quiet teachings, with the love for her daughter that transcended all boundaries. The future, like the mountains surrounding them, held both challenge and possibility. Sarah Mitchell, teacher, mother, survivor, was ready for both. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.